Tell me, girl, does your kind even know what a fork is, or do you people still eat with your hands?
That was the first sentence Victoria Ashford Caldwell ever said to Margaret Mitchell. March 3rd, 2024. The Grand Belmont Ballroom. 200 witnesses. Margaret, 68 years old, silver hair, navy dress, just whispered,
Ma'am, I don't want no trouble.
Trouble? You are the trouble. You're the stain this room's been trying to wipe off all night.
Then she swirled her glass of 1982 Chateau Margaux and splashed it straight down Margaret's chest. And in the back corner, a tall man in a charcoal suit slowly lowered his champagne glass and said absolutely nothing. But his silence was already writing a bill Victoria couldn't afford to pay. Now, before we go any further, I need you to understand who that quiet man in the charcoal suit really was. Because if you don't understand him, you won't understand what's coming. His name is Brandon Mitchell, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Hightower Capital Partners, a private equity firm out of Manhattan with $12 billion under management. $12 billion. But you won't find his face on a magazine cover. You won't find him on Instagram. Forbes has been chasing him for a profile piece since 2018, and every single year he tells them the same thing through his assistant. Mr. Mitchell respectfully declines. Please don't ask again. That's how private he is. And here's the part that matters most. Brandon Mitchell grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in the South Bronx, sleeping on a pull-out couch that had a spring poking through the cushion right where his ribs went. His daddy died when he was 9 years old. Construction accident, they told Margaret. Sign here, ma'am. Take this check. Move on. More on that later. A lot more. After the funeral, it was just Brandon and his mama. Just the two of them against a whole city that didn't care if they ate or didn't. And Margaret? Lord, let me tell you about Margaret. She worked 3 jobs to keep that little boy fed. Job number 1, night shift janitor at a white shoe law firm on Park Avenue. She mopped floors for partners who made in 1 hour what she made in a month. She knew every one of their names. Not a single one of them ever knew hers. Job number 2, weekend home health aide for elderly folks up in Riverdale. Bathing strangers, changing diapers on grown men, getting called sweetie by people who wouldn't look her in the eye. Job number 3, Sunday mornings at the church kitchen on 149th Street. That one didn't pay. She did it for free. Because Margaret Mitchell believed that no matter how broke you were, somebody out there was always broker. And she had a saying, one sentence she'd whisper to Brandon every single night before bed, with her rough hands cupping his face like he was the most precious thing ever made. Dignity don't cost $1, baby, but losing it'll cost you everything. Write that down. You're gonna hear it 3 times in this story, and each time, it's gonna hit different. Now here's what I need you to picture. A 12-year-old Brandon doing math homework at the kitchen table, at 1 in the morning, waiting for Mama to come home. The door finally creaks open. Margaret shuffles in. Her feet are bleeding through her socks because the cheap work shoes from Payless have rubbed her heels raw. And she sees her baby still awake. And she smiles. She doesn't complain. She doesn't cry. She just walks over, kisses his forehead, and says, "How's that algebra treating you, handsome?" That's the woman Victoria Ashford Caldwell threw wine on. I want you to hold that picture in your head for the rest of this story, because we're about to meet the people on the other side, and trust me, you're gonna want to hate them properly. The Caldwells. Old money. The kind of old money that pretends the oil it came from was noble, and the hands that dug it up didn't exist. Victoria Ashford Caldwell, 62 years old, third-generation heiress, net worth $2.3 billion. Famous in Upper East Side circles for 2 things, her emerald collection and her cruelty. In 2019, she fired a black nanny who'd worked for her family for 11 years. The reason she gave it brunch the next day? The poor thing smelled like the subway. I simply couldn't take it anymore. Her friends laughed. Her husband, Richard Caldwell, 65, sat on the board of 4 Fortune 500 companies. He once said at a dinner party, and I'm quoting a witness who was there, "Diversity is just charity with better PR." Their son, Preston Caldwell, 34. 3 failed startups, all bankrolled by daddy's money. Preston's personality could be summed up in one sentence. He's the kind of guy who tips 0 and complains the service was slow. Their daughter, Charlotte Caldwell Brown, 31. A philanthropist, which in her case meant she showed up to galas in gowns worth more than the charities raised, and then tweeted about giving back. That's the family. Now let me paint you the contrast. The same week Margaret was on her knees scrubbing a law firm bathroom for $13 an hour, Victoria was at a wine auction in Sotheby's, bidding $46,000 on a single bottle she had no intention of drinking. The same month Margaret was cutting coupons to afford Brandon's new school shoes, Charlotte was posting a photo from St. Bart's, captioned, "So blessed." The same year Margaret was hiding $1,800 in a coffee can on the top shelf of her kitchen cabinet, the money that would one day start Hightower Capital. Preston was crashing his second Porsche into a hydrant in the Hamptons and laughing about it on Facebook. 2 worlds, same country, touching each other only when one world needed somebody to clean up after the other. And somewhere in between those 2 worlds, a collision was being scheduled by fate itself. Now, let's come back to the night of March 3rd, 2024. Because the reason Margaret was at that gala in the first place matters. The charity being honored that night was called Bronx Mothers Rising. It supported single mothers in Margaret's old neighborhood, the exact neighborhood where she'd raised Brandon. When Brandon got the invitation, he didn't want to go. He hates those rooms. Hates the fake smiles, the fake kisses on the cheek, the fake interest in black excellence as long as it stays polite. But then he looked at his mama across the kitchen table of her modest house in New Rochelle, the house he'd bought her in cash in 2014, and he had an idea. He said, "Mama, how about you come with me? One night. Dress up. Let me show you off." Margaret put her hand on her chest, like he'd just offered her the moon. "Me? At a place like that? Baby, I ain't got nothing to wear." Brandon smiled. "Then we'll go get you something." She wouldn't let him buy her a designer gown, refused, said it was wasteful. So they drove to Macy's together, and Margaret picked out a navy dress on the clearance rack for $64, and she held it up in the mirror and twirled once, just once, and her eyes got wet. "Brandon, baby, I feel like a queen." He kissed her forehead. "That's because you are one, Mama." Hold on a second. Let me break in here, because I know some of you are already feeling something twist in your chest. Maybe because you've got a mama who worked herself to the bone. Maybe because you are that mama. Stay with me. This story is for you. The night of the gala, Brandon sent a car from Margaret. A quiet black sedan, no fanfare. She walked into the Grand Belmont lobby, clutching her little beaded purse like it was the only thing anchoring her to the floor. A doorman looked at her for 2 seconds too long. "Ma'am, deliveries are around back." Margaret smiled gently. "I'm a guest, sugar." He blinked, didn't apologize, just waved her through. 3 tables away from the entrance, a waiter named Jerome, a young black man from Queens, saw Margaret walk in. Then he looked across the room and saw Brandon Mitchell standing there in his charcoal suit, watching his mother with the softest look Jerome had ever seen on a rich man's face. Jerome recognized Brandon instantly. He'd served him twice before at private events, and Jerome made a decision right then and there. He wasn't going to say a word to anybody. because something told him tonight wasn't a night to blow a rich man's cover. He had no idea how right he was about to be. Margaret made it halfway across the ballroom before Victoria Ashford Caldwell spotted her from the bar. Victoria turned to Charlotte and whispered something. Charlotte giggled, and Victoria picked up her glass of 1982 Chateau Margaux and started walking. She was smiling the way a cat smiles at a bird that hasn't noticed the shadow yet. Margaret didn't see Victoria coming. She was standing near the silent auction table, holding a glass of ice water, not champagne, because Margaret never touched alcohol a day in her life, and she was reading the description card for a donated painting. A nice painting. Sunflowers. Reminded her of the plastic ones on her kitchen windowsill back home. She was smiling to herself. That's when the voice came from behind her left shoulder. Oh my, somebody let the help bring a +1 tonight. Margaret turned around slowly, and for the first time in 32 years, her blood ran cold. Because she knew that face. Not Victoria's face. The necklace, a massive emerald pendant surrounded by diamonds, set in yellow gold. Margaret had seen it once before, in a black and white newspaper photo from 1992, a community leaders gala in Westchester, 3 weeks after her husband David was buried. The necklace belonged to Richard Caldwell's mother, and the last name under that photo had been Caldwell. Margaret's hand started to shake. The ice in her water glass clinked, but before she could speak, Victoria stepped closer and tilted her head like she was examining an insect. Sweetheart, I just have to ask, did somebody in the kitchen lend you that dress, or did you borrow it off a clothesline? Preston Caldwell materialized at his mother's elbow, already snickering. Mom, stop. Be nice. She probably saved up for that dress her whole life. Charlotte joined them, wine glass in hand. Oh God, Preston, don't. What if she cries? Mascara runs are so last season on, well, you know. They all laughed. Margaret stood there, spine straight, the way her own mama taught her to stand when white folks wanted to see you bend. She said, very quietly, Ma'am, I was invited. I don't mean no harm to anyone. I'm just going to step over here and let you enjoy your evening. She started to walk away. That's when Victoria made her choice. Victoria took 2 quick steps, tripped on absolutely nothing, and launched the entire glass of 1982 Chateau Margaux straight into Margaret's chest. $400 of red wine. It hit her collar first, then her neck. Then it ran down the front of the navy dress Margaret had twirled in at Macy's, the dress that had made her feel like a queen 6 hours ago. It soaked into the fabric in the shape of a handprint. Margaret gasped. The room went silent. I mean, completely silent. 200 people, all frozen mid-sip. And then, and I want you to hear me on this, at least 14 phones came up. Not to help, to film. Victoria pressed her palm to her chest and put on the fakest shocked face you have ever seen in your life. Oh no! Oh, how clumsy of me. Someone get this poor woman a rag. A dirty one. She'll feel more at home. Charlotte actually snorted into her hand. Margaret's eyes filled up. She didn't move. She couldn't move. A single red drop rolled off her jaw and landed on her clearance rack shoes. And then, almost too soft to hear, Margaret whispered the sentence her own mama had taught her 50 years ago. Dignity don't cost $1. Victoria cupped her ear dramatically. What did she just say? Did you hear that, Preston? I think she just quoted a bumper sticker at me. The laughter around them got louder, uglier. That's when a hotel security guard walked up. Big guy, white polo shirt, earpiece. He looked at Margaret, then at Victoria, then back at Margaret. and he said the words that broke something deep inside that 68-year-old woman. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to come with me. Let's get you out of here quietly, okay?" Not Victoria. Margaret. They were escorting Margaret out. Her knees almost buckled. Her eyes darted around the room for her son, for Brandon, for anybody. And she couldn't find him in the sea of staring faces and raised phones. For one terrible second, she felt 9 years old again. Invisible. Unwanted. Told she didn't belong. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have come." The guard put a hand on her elbow, but across the ballroom, a tall man in a charcoal suit had already pulled out his phone, and the number he was dialing was about to turn the Caldwell family's entire world into ash. Brandon Mitchell didn't run. I want you to understand that. He didn't sprint across the ballroom like some movie hero. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He walked, slow, steady, one foot in front of the other, the way a man walks when he already knows how the story ends and he's just moving the pieces into place. And as he walked, the crowd parted. Not because they recognized him. They didn't. They parted because something in his face made people step sideways without thinking. The security guard had his hand on Margaret's elbow. Brandon reached them in 12 steps. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look at the guard. He didn't look at the 200 people holding up their phones. He looked at his mama. And then, very gently, he took off his charcoal suit jacket, an $8,000 Brioni, custom-tailored in Milan, and he wrapped it around Margaret's shoulders like she was freezing. He kissed her forehead, and he whispered, loud enough for only her to hear, "Mama, you hold your head up. We are not leaving this room." They are. Margaret's eyes filled up again, but this time for a different reason. Then Brandon turned to the security guard. Calm voice, almost kind. "What's your name, son?" The guard blinked. Wesley, sir. Wesley Brooks." "Wesley, I need you to take your hand off my mother's arm. And then I need you to get your supervisor on that earpiece. Tell him the owner is standing in the ballroom and would like a word." Wesley let out a nervous laugh. "The owner? Sir, with all due respect, I don't know who you—" Brandon pulled out his phone, tapped the screen twice, held it up so Wesley could see a text thread. At the top of the thread it read, "Carl Henderson, General Manager, Belmont Hotel Group." The last message, sent at 9:14 that same morning, said, "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. Everything is set for your mother's arrival tonight. C.H." Wesley's face went white. His hand came off Margaret's arm so fast you'd think she was on fire. He turned to the side and started talking into his earpiece in a panicked, low voice. Victoria, sensing the ground shift under her diamond heels, snapped. "Excuse me? Excuse me? Who on earth do you think you are, waltzing up here like you own the—" Brandon didn't even turn his head. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't look at her, didn't blink. And let me tell you something. That silence was the loudest slap Victoria Ashford Caldwell had ever been given in her entire 62 years. Because being ignored by a black man in a room full of her peers was, to her, worse than being screamed at. Her face turned the color of the wine she'd just thrown. 4 minutes later, the ballroom doors swung open, and Carl Henderson came speed-walking across the floor in a tuxedo. Mid-50s, white hair, slightly out of breath, he stopped in front of Brandon and did something that made 200 guests suck in air at the same time. He gave a small, respectful bow. "Mr. Mitchell, I am so deeply sorry. How can I make this right?" Brandon finally spoke, and his voice was so quiet you could hear the ice in Margaret's abandoned water glass melting. "Carl, I want the Caldwell family escorted out of my hotel. Tonight. I want every camera angle of the last 10 minutes preserved and timestamped. I want every guest who recorded on their phone asked, politely, to email their footage to legal. And Carl, I want my mother's dry cleaning bill personally handled by you." Carl nodded once. "Consider it done, sir." Victoria's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. "Your hotel? Your hotel? This is Belmont property. You don't... This is..." Carl turned to her with the polite patience of a man who had been waiting years to do exactly this. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Mitchell acquired the Belmont Hotel Group in June of 2022. He is the sole owner. Now please, follow me to the exit." Margaret let out one shaky breath. One single tear rolled down her cheek. She squeezed Brandon's hand. Relief. For the first time in 32 years. Relief. But Victoria Caldwell didn't get to $2.3 billion by losing gracefully. She got there by burning everything on her way out. By 9 the next morning, Victoria Caldwell had already made 3 phone calls that were going to try to bury Brandon Mitchell alive. Call number 1, her publicist. By 9:14 a.m., a exclusive story hit the New York Post online. The headline? Billionaire CEO bullies grieving socialite at charity gala. Witnesses stunned. The article painted Victoria as a poor widow-adjacent philanthropist who had accidentally slipped while holding her wine glass, and claimed Brandon had loomed over her menacingly and threatened her family. There was a photo of Victoria looking teary-eyed. There was no photo of Margaret at all. Call number 2. Richard Caldwell, from his leather armchair to an old friend at the Securities and Exchange Commission. 20 minutes later, an informal inquiry was opened into Hightower Capital Partners' 2023 filings. Not a formal investigation, just an inquiry. But in the private equity world, the word inquiry on SEC letterhead was enough to make grown men sweat through their shirts. Call number 3. Victoria herself, to 2 of Hightower's biggest limited partners, the Blackstone Anchor Fund, the Windsor Pension Trust. Together, they had $3.1 billion committed to Brandon's firm. By 11 a.m., both funds had requested emergency review meetings. By noon, the vultures were circling. Brandon sat alone in his corner office on the 42nd floor of a tower overlooking Central Park. His assistant had brought him coffee twice. He hadn't touched either cup. His chief operating officer, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Harper, stood in his doorway with a tablet in her hand. "Brandon, I need you to hear me. Issue a statement, just something. I regret the altercation. We are handling it privately. 12 words. Let the storm pass. If we don't, we could lose Blackstone by Friday." Brandon stared out at the park, didn't blink. "No." "Brandon." "I said no, Liz. I am not apologizing for my mother existing in a room." Elizabeth closed the door softly and left. And that's when the intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice came through quiet and careful. "Mr. Mitchell, your mother is in the lobby. She's holding a newspaper." Brandon closed his eyes. "Let me pause right here for a second, because I want you to picture this scene, and I want you to feel it in your chest. A 68-year-old woman in a cardigan and orthopedic shoes, riding a private elevator up 42 floors, clutching a crumpled copy of the New York Post in her arthritic hands. Her son's face is on page 2. The headline is calling him a bully, and she's coming to tell him to stop fighting. For her." The elevator dinged. Margaret walked into Brandon's office. She set the newspaper on his desk. She didn't sit down. "Baby?" Brandon stood up. "Mama, don't start." "Baby, I need you to hear me." Her voice was shaking, but steady in that way only old black women know how to make a voice. "I want you to let this go." "Mama!" "Let me finish." She put her hand on his desk to steady herself. Brandon. I have been called things my whole life that would peel the paint off a wall. I have been called names in grocery stores, in elevators, at bus stops, at church, at the DMV, by white women, by white men, by children whose mamas taught them how. And I survived every one of those words by remembering who I am and whose I am. One drunk woman at a party with a wine glass is not going to be the thing that undoes Margaret Mitchell. You hear me? I will not have you losing $12 billion of other people's money and 18 years of your blood and sweat because some mean old woman ruined a $64 dress. Let it go, son. Please. Let it go. And Brandon, 41 years old, 6'2", chief executive of a $12 billion fund. Brandon's face crumpled. Not like a CEO, like a 9-year-old boy whose daddy had just died. He dropped into his leather chair and put his face in his hands. And then the words came tumbling out. Mama. Mama, you scrubbed toilets so I could sit in boardrooms. You ate cereal for dinner 3 nights a week so I could have meatloaf on Sundays. You walked home in the snow in February of 1994 because you gave the bus fare to a homeless lady on 145th Street, and your feet were purple when you got through that door, and you still made me hot chocolate. And some billionaire in a $600 dress thinks she can throw wine on you like you're a stain on her carpet? Mama, no. Not this time. Not ever again. I don't care if I lose every dollar I got. I don't care if they take my firm. I don't care if I'm back scrubbing floors next to you on Park Avenue by Christmas. They don't get to touch you and walk away whole. They don't. They don't, Mama. They don't. He was crying now. Full, ugly crying. The kind grown men do once, maybe twice, in a lifetime. Margaret walked around the desk and pulled her baby's head against her stomach, right where she used to hold him when he was 6 and had a fever. She smoothed his hair with her worn hand, and, for the second time in this story, she said it. Dignity don't cost $1, baby, but losing it'll cost you everything. Second repetition. Different kind of hit, isn't it? Brandon sobbed into his mama's cardigan for 2 full minutes. Then he wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a deep breath, and said something that didn't quite make sense yet. Mama, I need you to tell me the truth about Daddy. Margaret went very, very still. What did you just say, baby? Tell me the truth. About how Daddy really died. Because there's a name in that newspaper on my desk that I've been trying not to think about for 24 hours. And the more I try not to think about it, the more my gut is telling me I already know the answer. Margaret sat down slowly in the chair across from him. Her hands started to tremble. Brandon, baby, some doors, once you open them, you can't close again. Mama, open the door. And Margaret Mitchell, who had carried a secret alone for 32 years so her son could grow up building instead of hating, Margaret Mitchell opened her mouth and then closed it. She couldn't do it. Not yet. She just stood up, kissed his forehead, and walked back out of his office without another word. Brandon watched the elevator doors close behind her. Then he stood up, walked to the locked bottom drawer of his desk, and pulled out something he hadn't touched in 6 years. A rusted blue coffee can, Maxwell House brand, the label peeling at the corners. Inside that can were 3 things. A faded photograph from June of 1992, Margaret in a black dress, a skinny 9-year-old Brandon clutching her hand at a graveside in the rain. A yellowed funeral program that said, David Brandon Mitchell, 1961 to 1992. And a single folded document, stamped at the top with 2 words Brandon hadn't been ready to look at until this exact moment. Caldwell Construction. His hand froze over the paper. Just then, his desk phone rang. He picked it up on the second ring. Mitchell? It was James Sullivan, his general counsel, former federal prosecutor. Voice tight. Brandon, I'm looking at something I need you to see. Tonight. In person. It's about the Caldwell inquiry. It's about... Brandon, it's about your father. Brandon's grip on the phone went white-knuckled. What did you say? June 14th, 1992. A construction accident in Yonkers. OSHA report. I just pulled it from the Federal Archives as part of our counter-research. Brandon, your father didn't die in an accident. That site had 16 open safety violations. The supervisor logged them 11 days before your father fell. 11 days. Somebody signed an order telling the crew to keep working anyway. And that somebody was Richard Caldwell. His signature is on the work order. His name is on the cover-up NDA your mother signed 2 weeks later for $12,000. Brandon couldn't speak. Brandon? You still there? He was staring at the coffee can, at the faded photograph of his 9-year-old self in the rain. Jim, I'm coming down. Pull everything. Every file, every name, every signature. And Jim, find out if there are other families. He hung up. He looked at the crumpled New York Post on his desk, Victoria's smug face staring up at him. And for the first time in 24 hours, Brandon Mitchell smiled. The Caldwells hadn't just thrown wine on his mother. They'd murdered his father. And they had forgotten all about it. Brandon drove to his mother's house in New Rochelle that same night. No driver, no security. Just him, alone, in a black SUV, with the Maxwell House coffee can sitting on the passenger seat, like a witness in a courtroom. He let himself in with his own key at 10:48 p.m. Margaret was sitting at her kitchen table, under the yellow overhead light, already waiting for him. Like she'd known he was coming. Like she'd been waiting 32 years for this exact knock on the door. There was a second cup of tea already poured across from her. Brandon set the coffee can on the table between them. Neither one of them said anything for a full 10 seconds. Then Margaret spoke first. You found it. Mama, look at me. Did you know? Silence. Mama, did you know it was Caldwell? Margaret's hands were wrapped around her teacup, and her knuckles were white. I knew the second I saw that necklace around her neck last Saturday night, baby. I recognized it from a newspaper photo I kept in a shoebox in my closet for 20 years before I finally threw it out. Brandon leaned forward. Then why didn't you say anything? Mama, why did you just stand there and let her humiliate you when you knew? And then Margaret looked up at him, and her eyes were older than he had ever seen them. Because if I had said one word in that ballroom, baby, I would have opened a door that I spent your entire childhood holding shut with my whole body. And I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for you to know. Know what, Mama? Margaret took a long, slow breath. Brandon, your daddy didn't slip off that scaffolding. Your daddy was told by his supervisor to keep welding on a beam that had been flagged unsafe 11 days before. He told that supervisor, a man named Harold Davis, that the rig wasn't braced right. Harold told your daddy if he didn't climb, he was fired. Your daddy had a wife and a 9-year-old son at home, so your daddy climbed. Her voice cracked. 2 weeks after the funeral, a lawyer in a gray suit came to our apartment. Caldwell lawyer. He put a document in front of me and a check for $12,000 next to it. $12,000, Brandon. For a husband, for a father. He told me if I signed, I would get the money for your daddy's burial. He told me if I didn't sign, Caldwell Construction had 20 lawyers who would drag me through court for 10 years, and I would lose. And I would lose you too, because I couldn't afford to feed us. And he said, And I remember this exact sentence, baby, because it lived in my chest for 32 years. He said, "Mrs. Mitchell, nobody in this city is going to believe a black widow over a Caldwell. Sign the paper and take the check and give your son a chance." Margaret was crying now, quietly, the way people cry when they've been practicing holding it in for decades. "So I signed, baby. I signed your daddy's dignity away for $12,000 because I wanted you to have a roof and shoes and school. And I promised myself that night that I would never, ever tell you that name, because I did not want you growing up building a life out of hate. I wanted you building a life out of love. And look what you built, Brandon. Look what you built!" Brandon reached across the kitchen table and took his mother's hands in his. He was crying too, but quieter now, steadier. "Mama, you built it, not me. You built every brick of it with your own 2 hands, and I just put my name on the sign." They sat there for a long time. Then Brandon said the sentence that changed everything. "Mama, I'm not building this next part out of hate. I'm building it out of the truth. There's a difference, and I need you to trust me." Margaret searched his face, and then, slowly, she nodded. "Do what you need to do, baby. Your daddy's been waiting a long time." Brandon was back in his war room at Hightower by 6 a.m. the next morning. Around the conference table, Elizabeth Harper, his COO, James Sullivan, his general counsel, and a 4th person Brandon had called personally at 4:30 in the morning. Sarah Whitman, senior investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal, a woman Brandon had known for 9 years and had never, ever given a single quote to until this exact moment. Sarah walked in with a coffee in one hand and a recorder in the other. "Brandon, I've known you since 2015 and you've never picked up my calls, so whatever you're about to give me, it better be real." Brandon slid a folder across the table. "Sarah, read that." She opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Then her mouth fell slightly open. "Oh my God." "Keep reading." 10 minutes later, Sarah set the folder down and looked up. "Brandon, if this OSHA report is authentic, if that signature is real, this isn't just a wrongful death case. This is criminal negligence. And if there are other families with the same NDA template..." James cleared his throat. "There are. I found 3 so far. 3 other widows, 3 other dead men. All between 1989 and 1996, all on Caldwell construction sites. All paid between $9,000 and $14,000. All signed the same boilerplate NDA. And Brandon, all 3 women are still alive. I have their phone numbers." The room went silent. Elizabeth said softly, "My God, he's been doing this for decades." But James wasn't finished. He slid one last page across the table to Brandon. "Brandon, there's one more thing. I almost missed it. Look at the bottom of page 11 of your mother's NDA. Look at the second signature line." Brandon looked, and his jaw tightened. Because the witness signature, the Caldwell family lawyer who had notarized his mother's silence in 1992, was a name he recognized from a Forbes article he had read 6 months ago. That lawyer was now a sitting federal judge in the Southern District of New York. Brandon closed the folder very slowly. "Sarah, how fast can you publish?" Sarah smiled like a wolf. "Give me 72 hours and a front page." Brandon nodded. Then he turned to his assistant. "Call Carl at the Belmont. Reserve the main ballroom for Thursday night, March 14th. Private event, 300 guests. I'll send the list personally. And I want the invitations on engraved cream stationery, hand-delivered." What should the invitation say, sir? Brandon thought for a moment. Then he said, just 4 words. Your presence is requested. And sign it, B. Mitchell. Victoria Caldwell received her envelope the next afternoon at her penthouse on Fifth Avenue. She opened it, read the 4 words, and she laughed out loud right there in her marble foyer. She turned to Richard and held up the card. Look at this, darling. The little CEO wants a rematch. How absolutely adorable. She tossed the invitation onto a silver tray and told her assistant to RSVP. Yes, she thought she was walking into a ballroom. She was walking into a courtroom with chandeliers. Thursday night, March 14th, 2024. 11 days after the wine hit Margaret's chest. The Grand Belmont Ballroom looked almost exactly the way it had looked the night of the gala. Same chandeliers, same Persian rugs, same long bar along the west wall. But the guest list was very, very different. 300 people, 41 reporters, including Sarah Whitman sitting front row with a notebook and a recorder. 2 observers from the Securities and Exchange Commission in gray suits. 1 senior attorney from the Office of the New York State Attorney General. 3 older women, 2 black, 1 Latina, sitting quietly at a reserved table near the stage, each holding a framed photograph face down in her lap. And in the front row, in a brand new ivory dress that Brandon had flown in a seamstress from Harlem to fit, sat Margaret Mitchell. Hair pinned up, pearl earrings, calm. The Caldwells walked in at 8:02 p.m. Victoria was in full armor, emeralds at her throat, diamonds on her wrists, a floor-length black Valentino gown. Richard in a tuxedo, Preston smirking, Charlotte already holding a glass of champagne she'd grabbed from a passing tray. They took seats at table 3, dead center, where Brandon had personally placed their name cards. Victoria leaned over to Richard and whispered, "Whatever he says tonight, we sue him Friday morning." Richard nodded. At 8:10 p.m., the lights dimmed. Brandon Mitchell walked onto the stage. No introduction, no music, no applause line. He adjusted the microphone once, looked out over the room, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. The voice of a man who has already won and is just waiting for everybody else to catch up. Good evening. 11 nights ago, in this exact ballroom, a woman named Victoria Ashford Caldwell threw a glass of wine on my mother and called her a stain. Tonight, I'd like to show all of you what the Caldwell family has been throwing on people like my mother for the last 32 years. The giant screen behind him lit up. Exhibit 1, an OSHA inspection report, dated June 3, 1992, Yonkers construction site. 16 documented safety violations. Stamped across the bottom, uncorrected, work ordered to continue. And at the very bottom, the signature authorizing the work to continue. Richard W. Caldwell. The ballroom went dead silent. Richard's face started to lose its color. Brandon didn't stop. 11 days after that report was filed, on June 14, 1992, a welder named David Brandon Mitchell fell 62 feet from an unbraced beam on that same site and died on impact. He left behind a 28-year-old wife and a 9-year-old son. His widow was offered $12,000 and an NDA. The lawyer who drafted that NDA is now a sitting federal judge. His name is in your press packets. Sarah Whitman was writing so fast her pen was blurring. Brandon raised his hands toward the reserved table near the stage. I'd like to introduce you to 3 women. Their names are Dolores Washington, Estelle Parker, and Ramona Fields. Their husbands were named Theodore, Samuel, and Luis. All 3 men died on Caldwell construction sites between 1989 and 1996. All 3 widows were paid between $9,000 and $14,000. All 3 signed the same boilerplate non-disclosure agreement. And all 3 of them are here tonight, breaking their silence for the first time in their lives. The three women stood up, turned their framed photographs around to face the cameras. 3 husbands, 3 smiling faces, 3 dead men. The room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for decades. Victoria's wine glass slipped half an inch in her hand. Exhibit 2. Brandon clicked the remote. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that this is not ancient history. This is also last Tuesday. The current Caldwell construction portfolio contains 23 open OSHA citations filed in the last 18 months on 4 active job sites in Queens, the Bronx, Newark, and Jersey City. 23. In 18 months. That means right now, as we sit in this beautiful ballroom, workers are climbing scaffolding that this family has been told is not safe. A murmur rippled through the press section. Preston tried to stand up. 2 SEC observers at the back of the room politely gestured for him to sit back down. Preston sat. Exhibit 3. And finally, at 7:58 p.m. tonight, exactly 12 minutes ago, the Wall Street Journal published a front-page story written by Sarah Whitman containing every single document I just showed you, authenticated by 3 independent forensic accountants. As of this moment, Caldwell Construction stock has suspended trading on the New York Stock Exchange. Richard Caldwell's hand went to his chest. Victoria stood up. This is defamation. This is slander. You cannot do this. I will have my lawyers. Brandon finally turned his eyes on her. Directly. For the first time all night. Mrs. Caldwell, 11 nights ago, you asked my mother if she knew what Cartier was. So let me ask you a question back. Do you know what OSHA Form 301 is? Because your husband has signed 16 of them. And every single signature is a man who didn't come home to his family. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and nothing came out. Nothing. 8 full seconds of silence from the loudest woman in Manhattan. The cameras caught every one of them. 8 seconds that would be screenshotted, turned into memes, played on every morning show in America by sunrise. Brandon stepped down off the stage. He walked, slow and steady, the way he had walked across this same floor 11 nights ago, directly to table 3. He stopped in front of Victoria, and then, from the inside pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a small, faded photograph. The one from the Maxwell House coffee can. A 28-year-old Margaret in a black dress. Rain falling. A skinny 9-year-old boy clutching her hand at a graveside in Yonkers. Brandon placed the photograph gently, face up, on the white tablecloth in front of Victoria's untouched plate. Mrs. Caldwell, this is the woman you threw wine on. Look at her. Victoria's eyes dropped to the photo. She couldn't help it. Say her name. Silence. Say her name. Victoria's lip trembled. Her hands shook. Her emeralds rattled against her collarbones. She could not. She could not get the words out. Brandon leaned down slightly, and his voice was almost a whisper. Her name is Margaret Mitchell. She buried her husband at 28 years old. She raised a CEO on a janitor's salary while your family was erasing her from the history books. And tonight, she gets her name back. Then Brandon stood up straight, turned, and walked back to the stage. He extended his hand toward the front row. Mama, would you please come up here? Margaret stood up. Every person in that ballroom rose with her. 300 people, on their feet, silent. She walked up the 3 steps to the stage, and Brandon handed her the microphone. Margaret looked out at the crowd for a long moment. Then she found Victoria's face in the crowd, and she spoke. Soft, clear, steady. Dignity don't cost $1, but losing it? That cost you everything. Third and final repetition. Full circle. The whole room felt it land. The applause started slow. One person, then two. Then the entire ballroom exploded into a standing ovation that lasted a full 90 seconds. Victoria Ashford Caldwell walked out of that ballroom alone. Richard didn't follow her. Preston didn't follow her. Charlotte didn't follow her. Not one of them. And then the consequences came. Fast. By midnight, Caldwell Construction had lost its general contractor license in the state of New York. By Friday morning, the SEC had converted its informal inquiry from Hightower Capital to a formal criminal investigation of Caldwell Holdings. By Saturday, the New York State Attorney General had filed a motion to reopen David Mitchell's 1992 wrongful death case. The $12,000 NDA was declared void on grounds of fraud. By the following Wednesday, Dolores, Estelle, and Ramona had filed a joint civil suit for $340 million. By the end of the month, the federal judge who had notarized Margaret's NDA in 1992 had resigned from the bench for personal reasons. By April 1st, the Caldwell Fifth Avenue penthouse was on the market. By April 20th, the family's net worth had dropped from $2.3 billion to just under $80 million. Preston's startup funding evaporated overnight. Charlotte's charity lost its nonprofit status for years of fraudulent filings. Richard was indicted on 7 counts of criminal negligence and conspiracy. And Victoria? Victoria stopped leaving her apartment. She stopped answering her phone. 32 years of silence, broken open in one single evening by a son who had finally learned what his mother had been carrying on her back since 1992. And somewhere in a small kitchen in New Rochelle, Margaret Mitchell put on a kettle, pulled out 2 mugs, and whispered to a photograph on her refrigerator, "I kept my promise, David. I raised him right."